Bună dimineața și bun găsit la BU! Sunt Sabina Iosub și vă invit să rămâneți alături de mine în următoarea jumătate de oră. O să discutăm despre chestiuni legate de agricultură. Today here with me in the European Parliament in Strasbourg is Herbert Dorfmann. Thank you so much for your presence.
Thank you for the invitation.
We will discuss about the priorities in agriculture, and I will start from the cereal crisis because I know it's on top of the debates in your committee and of course at the European level.
Yeah, indeed. We know the situation in Ukraine. We want to help to the Ukrainians to export their products, their grain. We know that this is not possible in this moment via the Odessa port. So it makes sense to export this grain via land, via the European Union. But from the very beginning, the idea was to export this grain from Ukraine to the final destination somewhere in the world, not in the European Union. And we see that most of the export ends in the European Union and ends especially in the neighborhood countries, so also in Romania, but also in Polonia, and I think in Poland. And I think we need to find rules how to bring this grain to the final destination, because it's completely unacceptable that today these so-called solidarity lanes through the European Union, they do not work at all. Only 2, 3, 4% of the grain which enters from Ukraine to the European Union goes out again from the European Union, so goes to a European Union port and goes somewhere to the world where this grain is heavily needed.
What is actually the solution? More controls? If you are putting more controls, it might be difficult to get the cereals out. I don't know, some other type of rules. What kind of solutions you may find here at the European level?
I personally said from the very beginning that we need to guarantee that an important part of this grain ends up at the port. So I think we need to tell also the Ukrainians that if they want to export, they need to guarantee that a certain amount goes to a final destination outside the European Union. I understand that also for the Ukrainian exporters, the European Union is a very attractive market, so they try to export to the European Union, and we need to also to admit, last year we had a very low harvest here in the European Union, and it was important also for us to have these products from Ukraine. This year the situation is a bit different, and I think we need to have an agreement with Ukraine about this. We have the proposal now that we give a support for the export via to third countries, but for this we would need to find the money. I personally think we need to put clear rules to who exports from Ukraine.
What other priorities do you have in Agriculture Committee besides that regarding the cereals?
Well, actually, in general, agriculture is again a very, very important political topic in the European Union, and also, I think also in the society as a whole. I was amazed last week. We had the European Youth Week, and the young people, not farmers, young people from all over Europe, they worked for 1 week in the parliament, and at the end they decided that the most important political topic is agriculture.
Okay, that's interesting.
Some years ago, this had been completely unthinkable. Everything else, technology, artificial intelligence, everything was more important. But now, I think the combination, what happened in Ukraine, the inflation, and also I think a new approach towards nutrition, people understand more and more, and especially also young people, that agriculture is an important topic. And I think more and more we get aware how important is agriculture also from a strategic point of view. I mean, for the European Union to have enough food for their own citizens is an important strategic thing. So what are our most important topics for now? We are working on regulation for the reduction of the use of pesticides. Big debate about this, how to achieve this, what is the technology, what we need to achieve, let's say, a reduction in the use of pesticides. And then we have a very important debate about new breeding techniques, about the use of technologies like CRISPR-Cas when it comes to genetic or to breeding plants and animals, but mainly plants.
The debate is so big also because there are so many differences between the member states. If we are discussing about pesticides, for example, when we are looking at the European Union and the non-European countries, we see the differences that are so big. When we are discussing about the breeding technique, we know that not in the whole Europe we have the same level of technique. So how will you manage to find a common way?
Well, it's clear we have completely different situations in the European Union. We have also different types of agriculture, and this is partly due to our history.
Sure.
But this is also due to our climate. The European Union starts in the south in the Mediterranean area and ends in the north in close to the North Pole. So and it's also the European Union has very different situations. We have member states like also Romania, but my own member state Italy, Spain, where fruit and vegetable production, wine production is extremely important, and there is a higher need on pesticides like on permanent grassland, for example, in Denmark or in the Netherlands, and we need to be aware about this. And then I think there's a common. We all know that the reduction of the use of pesticides makes sense. Makes sense, by the way, also for farmers, because it's also pesticides are also expensive. But we need to find technologies to do this, and we need to find ways to do this. And I think we should not only debate how much we want to reduce, we need to also debate how to achieve this goal and what the farmers need in order to have an alternative, maybe more resistant plants, new technology, new types of pesticides which are less impacting. So it's a whole, let's say, package of measures, clearly including research and development. We need to invest in research for new pesticides which are less dangerous. So that is work which cannot be done just in 5 years. It needs to be a program on the long term.
In your opinion, till the end of this mandate, will you, as Parliament, be able to assure a good space, let's say, for having good food at reasonable prices, to be protected at the European level?
Well, actually, I think our food systems are working quite well. We had in this legislative term 2 big crises: the pandemic first and the war in Ukraine afterwards, and both impacted heavily on the food systems. And we saw how resilient our food systems are. So even in the worst times of the pandemic, the supermarkets were not empty. And this is, we see that we worked a lot in the last decades in order to have enough food at a reasonable price in Europe. But we saw also in the last year, after the invasion of Ukraine, how easily, for example, food prices can, or we can have a problem on food prices, because unfortunately inflation we have in this moment is mostly driven also by food prices. And for many families in Europe, this becomes more and more a problem. And I think we see from this crisis clearly that we need to have enough food, we need to have high value food, but we need to have food also at reasonable prices, because otherwise we risk that some families and people in Europe cannot afford European food anymore. And I personally think we should not have a double system where people with a higher income, they can afford fancy European food, and the other ones, they need to buy food from somewhere in the world with different standards. I think it's a political, let's say, duty, obligation in Europe to guarantee that everybody in Europe can afford safe food from Europe.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much.